Some fathers would do anything to give their children a better life. Ben Carter was working 3 jobs just to keep his son's dreams alive when everything changed in a single night. At 52, Ben was just another maintenance worker in a gleaming Chicago high-rise, invisible to the executives who walked past him every day. But when a storm knocked out the power and trapped the building's powerful CEO in a broken elevator, Ben became her only hope. In the darkness, 2 strangers shared their deepest fears about parenthood and sacrifice. Ben guided her to safety with calm words and steady hands, never knowing she was the woman who could change his life forever. The next morning, CEO Vivian Locke began searching every floor for the man who had shown her what real strength looked like. What happens when someone with unlimited power decides to help the one person who never asked for anything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through Ben Carter's thin apartment walls at 6:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 5 years. He reached across the narrow twin bed, the same bed he'd slept in since giving Danny the master bedroom, and silenced the noise before it could wake his son. His weathered tool belt hung on the bedpost, leather cracked from years of honest work, tools worn smooth by countless repairs. Ben's morning routine had become a sacred ritual. Coffee first, black and strong enough to cut through the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched into his bones. Then breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast, and whatever fruit was on sale that week. The kitchen was small but spotless, every surface scrubbed clean despite his exhaustion. This was his sanctuary, the place where he could provide for Danny in the most fundamental way. "Morning, Dad?" Danny's voice carried the soft uncertainty that had become his signature since the divorce. At 16, he was all elbows and artistic dreams, his dark hair perpetually falling across eyes that saw beauty in everything. A gift Ben both cherished and worried about, in a world that didn't always reward sensitivity. "Sleep well?" Ben asked, sliding a plate across their small dining table. The furniture was second-hand, bought piece by piece from thrift stores, but Danny had never complained. Not once. Danny nodded, already pulling out his sketchbook. Even at breakfast, his hands moved constantly, capturing the morning light as it filtered through their single window. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted building in Rogers Park, not the worst neighborhood but far from the best. Ben had chosen it carefully close enough to Danny's art school for the bus route, cheap enough that he could almost afford it on his maintenance salary. Almost being the operative word. "Mrs. Chen wants to talk to you about my portfolio," Danny said quietly, not looking up from his drawing. "She says there are opportunities I should know about." Ben's chest tightened. Opportunities usually meant money they didn't have. "I'll call her today," he promised, though he dreaded what that conversation might reveal. Danny's talent was undeniable even. Ben, who couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler, could see the magic in his son's work. But talent and opportunity were expensive luxuries. After Danny left for school, Ben allowed himself exactly 10 minutes to sit in his favorite chair, a recliner he'd rescued from a curbside, reupholstered himself, and study the bills spread across his coffee table. 3 jobs barely covered their expenses. Days he worked construction with Rodriguez Construction. Afternoons he did handyman work for a property management company. And nights he maintained the gleaming Meridian Tower downtown. The tower job paid the least, but offered the most stability, and in Ben's world, stability trumped everything. He touched the photograph on the side table Danny at his first art show, beaming beside a painting of the Chicago skyline. Ben had worked a double shift that day to afford the entry fee, but seeing his son's pride had been worth every hour of exhaustion. The divorce 5 years ago had stripped away more than just his marriage. Sarah had taken the house, the savings, and most of their shared dreams. She'd remarried within a year, a successful accountant who could provide the stability Ben couldn't. Danny visited his mother every other weekend, returning with stories of nice restaurants and family vacations that Ben tried not to resent. "You're a good father," Sarah had told him during one of their rare, cordial conversations. But good doesn't pay for college. The words had cut deep because they were true. Ben's tool belt felt heavier as he prepared for another day. Each tool had its place, earned through years of learning that problems always had solutions if you were patient enough to find them. His father had taught him that back when working with your hands was considered honorable, before the world decided that only college degrees measured a man's worth. The bus ride to the Meridian Tower took 40 minutes, enough time for Ben to watch the city transform from his working-class neighborhood to the gleaming downtown corridor where money flowed like water. The tower itself was a monument to success, 50 floors of steel and glass that scraped the Chicago sky, home to tech companies, law firms, and dreams that required 7-figure budgets. Ben entered through the service entrance, nodding to Carlos Mendoza, the security guard who'd become his closest friend at the tower. Carlos was nearing retirement, his pepper-gray hair and steady demeanor making him the unofficial father figure for the building's night crew. "Storm coming in tonight," Carlos warned, gesturing toward the darkening sky visible through the lobby's floor to ceiling windows. "Weather service is calling for heavy rain, maybe some power issues." Ben nodded, already mentally reviewing the building's backup systems. In his 5 years working at Meridian, he'd learned every pipe, wire, and ventilation shaft. The building was beautiful but aging, its infrastructure pushed beyond original specifications by constant renovations and cost-cutting measures. He'd submitted reports about potential issues, the elevator system's quirks, the backup generator's intermittent failures, the roof drainage problems, but maintenance requests often disappeared into the bureaucratic maze of building management. "Evening, Mr. Carter." Maria Santos appeared with her cleaning cart, her smile warm despite the late hour. She was roughly Ben's age, supporting 3 children as a single mother, and had quickly become another member of their unofficial night shift family. Maria cleaned the upper floors, while Ben handled mechanical systems, their paths crossing often enough that they developed an easy friendship. "How's Roberto doing with his job search?" Ben asked, genuinely concerned about Maria's eldest son. "Better, thanks to that resume help you gave him. He has an interview next week at the hospital." Maria's gratitude was always sincere, though Ben never thought his advice was worth much. He'd simply shared what he'd learned from his own job searches, the small tricks that helped working-class applicants stand out. The night crew's camaraderie was born from shared understanding. They were the invisible army that kept the tower functioning, arriving after the executives left, ensuring everything was perfect when the important people returned each morning. They took pride in their work, even when that work went unnoticed. 50 floors above them, in the executive suite that Ben had never seen, Vivian Locke was experiencing her own kind of isolation. At 50, Vivian had reached the pinnacle of corporate success through a combination of brilliance, determination, and calculated ruthlessness that had left little room for personal relationships. Recently appointed as CEO of Meridian Technology Solutions, she occupied the corner office with views that stretched to Lake Michigan, surrounded by the trappings of power she'd fought 2 decades to achieve. But power, she'd discovered, was a lonely throne. Her assistant Jennifer had left hours ago, along with the rest of the executive team, leaving Vivian alone with quarterly reports and the weight of expectations that felt heavier each day. The board had made their position clear: show immediate results or face replacement. The tech industry moved at light speed, and shareholders had little patience for learning curves, even for newly appointed CEOs. Vivian's own journey to this office had been carved from nothing. Raised in poverty by a single mother in Detroit, she'd worked her way through community college, then state university, then an MBA program that left her with crushing debt but opened doors to opportunities she'd only dreamed about. Every promotion had been earned through 18-hour days and weekend sacrifices, relationships left behind in pursuit of the next rung on the corporate ladder. She'd never married, never had children. Her career had been her child, nurtured and protected above all else. Now, at 50, she sometimes wondered if the sacrifice had been worth it. The corner office was magnificent, but she ate most of her meals alone at her desk, surrounded by the hum of expensive technology and the distant sound of a city that felt increasingly foreign. The irony wasn't lost on Hirsch, commanded a company that specialized in connecting people through technology, yet she'd never felt more disconnected from humanity. Vivian's reflection was interrupted by Jennifer's voice through the intercom. "Ms. Locke, building maintenance called about potential power issues tonight. They wanted executives to know there might be some disruptions." "Thank you, Jennifer. You should head home before the storm hits." "Are you sure? I can stay if you need anything." Vivian almost said yes. Jennifer's company, even in a professional capacity, would be welcome. But the quarterly projections demanded her attention, and she'd learned long ago that personal needs had to wait for business priorities. "I'll be fine. See you tomorrow." As Jennifer's footsteps faded down the hallway, Vivian returned to her reports, unaware that 50 floors below, Ben Carter was beginning his rounds, checking the building systems that would soon bring their two worlds together in ways neither could imagine. The storm gathered strength outside, rain beginning to streak the tower's windows, while inside, two people from completely different worlds worked through the night tone, maintaining the building's foundation. The other, planning its financial future, both unaware that in a few hours their lives would intersect in a broken elevator that would change everything. The Meridian Tower stood against the Chicago skyline like a monument to human ambition, its lights twinkling in the darkness, housing dreams and struggles on every floor. Tonight, those dreams would collide in ways that neither money nor determination could have planned, proving that sometimes the most important connections happen when the lights go out and all that's left is two people talking in the dark. The storm arrived with the fury that only Lake Michigan could deliver, transforming Chicago's autumn evening into a tempest of wind and rain that rattled the Meridian Tower's windows. Ben felt the building sway slightly as he made his rounds on the 32nd floor, a barely perceptible movement that most people would never notice, but that spoke volumes to someone who knew the tower's moods. Lightning illuminated the city in stark, dramatic flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to roll through the building's steel bones. Ben checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. Most of the tower's tenants had wisely gone home hours ago, but a few lights still burned in the upper floors where dedicated workaholics pushed through the night. The first power fluctuation came as a brief dimming of the hallway lights, lasting just long enough to make Ben pause in his work. He was replacing a faulty outlet cover in the maintenance room when the building's electrical system hiccuped, sending a subtle tremor through the fluorescent fixtures overhead. "That's not good," he muttered, pulling out his radio to check with Carlos in the security office. "You seeing those power dips down there?" Carlos's voice crackled through the static. "Yeah, just had one up here. How's the backup generator looking?" "Running diagnostics now. Everything shows green, but you know how reliable those readings are." Ben did know. The building's backup systems were adequate on paper, but hadn't been properly updated in years. He'd filed reports about the generator's intermittent faults and the elevator system's increasing sensitivity to power fluctuations, but building management's response was always the same. Maintain what we have. Don't spend money on what might happen. 50 floors above, Vivian Locke was experiencing her own moment of concern as her office lights flickered. She looked up from the quarterly projections spread across her mahogany desk, watching the rain streak down her floor-to-ceiling windows in patterns that reminded her of tears. The board meeting was tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp, and these numbers had to tell the right story. Meridian Technology Solutions was hemorrhaging talent to younger, more agile companies, and their latest product launch had been a disappointment. The board's patience was wearing thin, and Vivian knew her honeymoon period as CEO was rapidly ending. Her emergency phoned a dedicated line for building emergency SAT, silent on her desk, its battery indicator showing red. She'd been meaning to charge it for days but had never found the time. It seemed like a metaphor for her life, late important things neglected in favor of urgent ones. Another power fluctuation, longer this time, made her computer screen flicker ominously. Vivian quickly saved her work, grateful for the cloud backup systems that protected months of strategic planning. The storm was intensifying, and she began to wonder if staying this late had been wise. She gathered her papers, deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. The presentation would have to be good enough she needed to get home before the weather got worse. Vivian pressed the elevator call button and waited, listening to the rain pound against the windows with increasing intensity. Ben was in the basement mechanical room when the second major power fluctuation hit, this one strong enough to trip several circuit breakers. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the building in an eerie red glow that transformed familiar spaces into something from a horror movie. His radio crackled to life immediately. "Ben, we've got multiple system alerts," Carlos reported, his voice tense with professional concern. "Elevators showing fault codes. Emergency lighting activated on floors 15 through 35. "I'm on it," Ben replied, already moving toward the main electrical panel. Years of experience had taught him to read the building's electrical signatures like a doctor reading vital signs, and what he saw wasn't encouraging. The storm was putting stress on the power grid that the building's aging infrastructure wasn't designed to handle. High above, Vivian stood before the elevator doors, watching the floor indicator lights flicker erratically. The display showed an elevator car approaching her floor, then pausing, then resuming its climb. When the doors finally opened, with a mechanical groan that sounded distinctly unhealthy, she hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The elevator felt different, a subtle vibration in the floor that wasn't normally there, a faint electrical smell that suggested systems operating beyond their normal parameters. Vivian pressed the button for the lobby, noting how the panel lights seemed dimmer than usual. The elevator began its descent smoothly enough, but around the 40th floor it lurched slightly, causing Vivian's stomach to drop. She gripped the handrail instinctively, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. She'd always harbored a mild claustrophobia, a fear she'd never shared with anyone but which made moments like this particularly unsettling. "Probably just the storm," she said aloud, surprised by how her voice echoed in the small space. But as they passed the 35th floor, the elevator shuddered again, more violently this time, and the lights went out completely. In the absolute darkness that followed, Vivian felt the car lurch to a stop, with a metallic grinding sound that spoke of mechanical failure rather than a normal stop. The emergency lighting should have activated immediately, but nothing happened. Vivian was trapped in complete darkness, suspended somewhere between floors in a metal box that suddenly felt much smaller than it had moments before. Her breathing quickened as claustrophobia clawed at her chest. She fumbled for the emergency phone in the elevator panel, but it was dead, no dial tone, no connection to the outside world. Her cell phone showed no signal, 50 floors of steel and concrete blocking any hope of communication. "Help," she called out, her voice cracking with the first edge of panic. "Somebody help me." The darkness pressed in around her like a living thing, and she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. This was her nightmare, trapped, powerless, completely dependent on others for rescue. Everything she'd built her life around, control, self-reliance, the ability to solve problems through intelligence and determination, meant nothing in this metal tomb. 2 floors below, Ben was reviewing the electrical schematics when he heard a faint voice calling for help, barely audible through the building's thick walls. He stopped working and listened intently, his head tilted toward the elevator shaft. There it was again. Someone was trapped. Ben grabbed his most powerful flashlight and headed for the elevator maintenance panel, his mind already running through the building's elevator system. 3 cars served the upper floors, and the power fluctuations would have affected all of them. But only 1 car was showing on his diagnostic panel as stopped between floors, the express elevator, currently sitting between the 34th and 35th floors. "Ma'am?" he called through the shaft access panel, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone trained to handle emergencies. "Can you hear me?" "Yes." Vivian's voice came back immediately, filled with relief and desperation. "I'm stuck in the elevator. The power went out and—" "I know, ma'am. My name is Ben, and I'm building maintenance. I'm going to get you out of there, but I need you to stay calm and listen carefully to what I tell you. Can you do that?" Something in Ben's voice, the steady confidence, the gentle professionalism immediately began to calm Vivian's panic. This wasn't just a random building employee. This was someone who knew what he was doing. "Yes," she managed, her breathing starting to slow. "Yes, I can do that." "Good. First, are you injured? Did you hit anything when the elevator stopped?" "No, I'm fine, just scared." The admission surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd admitted weakness to anyone. "That's completely normal," Ben assured her. "Being trapped is scary, but you're safe. The elevator car is secure, and I'm going to get you out. It might take a little time, though, so we're going to get acquainted while I work. What's your name?" "Vivian. Vivian Locke." Ben paused in his work, recognizing the name from building directories. The new CEO was trapped in his elevator, but to him, she was just another person who needed help. "Nice to meet you, Vivian. I wish it were under better circumstances. Now, I'm going to start working on getting power restored to your car, but if that doesn't work, we might need to use the emergency hatch. Either way, you're getting out of there tonight." As Ben began the methodical process of troubleshooting the elevator system, thunder crashed overhead, and the storm continued its assault on the Meridian Tower. Neither of them knew it yet, but in that broken elevator, suspended between floors and worlds, something was beginning that would change both their lives forever. All it took was darkness, desperation, and two strangers talking through a wall. "Okay, Vivian, I've got some good news and some challenging news." Ben's voice came through the elevator shaft wall, steady and reassuring. "The good news is that your elevator car is perfectly secure. You're not going to fall. The challenging news is that the power surge fried some circuits, so we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way." Inside the darkened elevator, Vivian pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. The initial panic had subsided thanks to Ben's calm presence, but she still felt trapped in a way that went beyond the physical confines of the metal box. "What does old-fashioned way mean?" she asked, proud that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "There's an emergency hatch in the ceiling of every elevator car. I'm going to guide you through opening it, and then we'll get you up to the 35th floor through the shaft. It's completely safe. I've done this before." Vivian looked up at the ceiling she couldn't see in the absolute darkness. The idea of crawling through an elevator shaft felt like something from an action movie, not something a 50-year-old CEO should be doing at midnight. "I'm not exactly dressed for climbing," she said, thinking of her pencil skirt and heels. Ben's chuckle came through the wall, warm and understanding. "Nobody ever is. Don't worry, we'll take it slow and steady. First things first, though. Feel around the ceiling until you find a square panel. It should be about 2 feet by 2 feet, with a small handle or latch." Vivian reached up, her hands exploring the elevator ceiling in the darkness. After several minutes of careful searching, she found what felt like a recessed handle. "I think I found it." "Perfect. Now, that panel should lift up and slide to one side. It might be a little heavy, so don't worry if it takes some effort." The panel was indeed heavy, and Vivian had to stretch to get proper leverage. Years of executive stress had kept her in reasonable shape, but this was unlike any corporate challenge she'd ever faced. After several attempts, the panel shifted, letting in a faint current of cooler air from the shaft above. "Got it," she called out, feeling genuinely proud of this small accomplishment. "You're doing great," Ben encouraged. "Now comes the interesting part. I'm going to lower a safety harness down to you just a precaution. Then I'll guide you up to the shaft opening." Vivian heard mechanical sounds from above Ben moving around in the elevator shaft. With the confidence of someone who treated 30-story drops as just another day at the office. Soon, she felt rope brushing against her hands. "That's the harness," Ben explained. "Put it on like a vest and buckle it around your waist. I know it's awkward in the dark, but take your time." The harness was more complex than Vivian had expected, with multiple straps and buckles that seemed designed to confuse her. She struggled with it for several minutes, growing frustrated with her inability to figure out something that should be simple. "I can't get this right," she admitted, embarrassment creeping into her voice. Hey, no worries. These things are tricky even with full lighting. Tell me what you're feeling. Are there two straps coming over your shoulders? For the next 10 minutes, Ben patiently walked her through each step of putting on the safety equipment, his voice never losing its calm professionalism. Vivian found herself relaxing despite the circumstances, drawn in by his gentle competence. You know, she said, as she finally secured the last buckle, I run a company with 1,200 employees, but I've never felt more clueless than I do right now. Different kinds of smart. Ben replied simply, I couldn't run a company to save my life, but I know elevator shafts. That's what makes the world work. Everybody's good at different things. The wisdom in that simple statement struck Vivian unexpectedly. In her corporate world, intelligence was measured by financial metrics and strategic thinking. The idea that Ben's knowledge was equally valuable had never occurred to her, though it seemed obvious now. All right, here's where it gets interesting, Ben continued. I'm going to lower down a rope ladder. When you feel it, grab hold and I'll help guide you up. The shaft opening is only about 8 feet above your elevator car. The ladder felt solid and reassuring when it touched her hands. Vivian kicked off her heels, a practical decision that somehow felt symbolic, and began her climb into the unknown. That's it, nice and steady, Ben coached from above. Don't look down, just focus on the next rung. The climb was easier than she'd expected, though her pencil skirt made every movement awkward. She could hear Ben moving around above her, and gradually she began to see faint light filtering down from somewhere far above. Almost there, Ben encouraged. Reach up and you'll feel the edge of the opening. When Vivian's hand touched solid floor, she felt a surge of relief, so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. Strong hands gripped her wrists and helped pull her up and out of the elevator shaft onto the 35th floor. For a moment, they both sat on the floor catching their breath, Vivian's legs shaking from the climb and the adrenaline. In the dim emergency lighting, she got her first clear look at her rescuer. Ben Carter was not what she'd expected. He was perhaps 52, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent working with his hands. His maintenance uniform was clean but worn, and his tool belt looked like it had seen decades of honest use. But it was his eyes that struck her kind, intelligent eyes that held depths she hadn't anticipated. You okay? He asked, genuine concern in his voice. I think so, Vivian managed, suddenly aware that she was sitting on a dirty floor in her expensive business suit, her hair probably a mess. Looking nothing like the composed executive she worked so hard to present to the world. You did great up there, Ben said, beginning to coil up the safety equipment with practiced efficiency. Not everyone stays calm in a situation like that. I didn't feel calm. Calm isn't about not being scared, Ben replied, his weathered hands working steadily. It's about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. You've got more backbone than you think. The simple compliment meant more to Vivian than any business accolade she'd ever received. This man had risked his own safety to help a stranger, asking nothing in return, treating her rescue as just part of his job. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know how to repay you for this. Ben looked genuinely puzzled by the suggestion. No need to repay anything. This is what we do, help people. It's not about payment. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, and the building's power had stabilized. Ben's radio crackled to life as Carlos checked in, and normal operations were slowly resuming throughout the Meridian Tower. As they stood to leave, Vivian realized she was barefoot, her expensive heels abandoned in the elevator car somewhere below. Ben noticed her predicament and chuckled softly. Guess we'll have to retrieve those tomorrow. Good thing the 35th floor has carpet. They walked toward the elevator bank that would take Vivian down to the lobby, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. At the elevator doors, they faced each other awkwardly, two people from completely different worlds who had shared something extraordinary. Will you be all right getting home? Ben asked. My driver is waiting, Vivian replied, then felt foolish for mentioning the luxury that highlighted the gap between them. But Ben just nodded, as if company drivers were perfectly normal, and pressed the elevator call button for her. When the doors opened to reveal a perfectly functioning elevator car, they both smiled at the irony. As Vivian stepped inside, she turned back to Ben one more time. "Thank you again. Really. Just glad you're safe," Ben replied as the doors began to close. As the elevator descended, Vivian stared at her reflection in the polished steel doors, disheveled, dirty, barefoot, and somehow more alive than she'd felt in years. Meanwhile, 50 floors above, Ben Carter returned to his rounds, never imagining that the woman he'd just rescued was about to turn his life upside down. Vivian Locke had never been the type to lose sleep over anything. Decades of corporate pressure had taught her to compartmentalize, to file away personal concerns in favor of business priorities. But 3 days after the elevator incident, she found herself staring at the ceiling of her Lincoln Park penthouse at 3 a.m., replaying every moment of that night in the darkness. It wasn't the rescue itself that kept her awake, though that had been harrowing enough. It was the man who had performed it, Ben Carter, whose calm competence and genuine kindness had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about value and worth. By Thursday morning, Vivian had made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of sending Jennifer or one of her other assistants, she would personally find Ben and thank him properly. It seemed like a simple enough task. How hard could it be to locate one maintenance worker in her own building? Very hard, as it turned out. "I'm looking for one of the maintenance staff," she told Carlos at the security desk, trying to sound casual. "Ben Carter. He helped me during the power outage the other night." Carlos studied her with the shrewd eyes of a man who'd spent 30 years reading people. He recognized her. Of course, the new CEO's face had been in every company newsletter and posted in every elevator. But this request was unusual enough to make him cautious. "Might I ask what this is regarding, Miss Locke?" "I just wanted to thank him personally. He went above and beyond during the emergency." Carlos softened slightly. Ben was popular among the building staff, respected for his skill and liked for his willingness to help anyone who needed it. If the CEO wanted to recognize good work, that was admirable. "Ben works the night shift, ma'am. He's usually here from about 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. You might catch him in the basement maintenance area if you're working late." Vivian thanked Carlos and spent the rest of the day trying to concentrate on quarterly projections, while part of her mind wondered about Ben Carter's life. What kind of man chose to work 3 jobs? What drove that level of dedication? And why couldn't she stop thinking about the gentle way he'd talked her through her panic? That evening, Vivian did something she hadn't done in years. She stayed late, not because work demanded it, but because she wanted to. At 7 p.m., she found herself taking the service elevator to the basement levels, feeling oddly nervous about the encounter. The basement was a maze of mechanical rooms, storage areas, and utility corridors that formed the hidden skeleton of the gleaming tower above. Vivian had never been down here before, and she was struck by how different it felt from the polished corporate floors she knew. This was the working heart of the building, all function and no form, where the real business of keeping a 50-story tower operational happened around the clock. She heard him before she saw him, the sound of tools working against metal, accompanied by a low humming that suggested someone genuinely content with their work. Following the sound, she found Ben in a mechanical room, bent over a complex-looking piece of equipment, his hands moving with the precision of long experience. For a moment, Vivian simply watched him work. There was something deeply satisfying about observing true competence in action, the way Ben diagnosed a problem, selected the right tool, and made precise adjustments with no wasted motion. This was mastery, she realized, just as valid as any executive skill she'd ever developed. "Mr. Carter?" Ben looked up, startled to see the CEO standing in his domain. He straightened immediately, wiping his hands on a cloth, his expression professionally neutral but clearly surprised. "Ms. Locke, I didn't expect to see you down here. I was looking for you, actually. I wanted to thank you again for the other night, what you did." She paused, searching for words that seemed adequate. "It meant more than you know." Ben looked genuinely puzzled by her presence. "You already thanked me, ma'am. Really, it was just part of the job." "Was it?" Vivian asked. Going into an elevator shaft to rescue someone, talking them through a panic attack? That seems like it goes well beyond normal maintenance duties. She saw something shift in Ben's expression, a brief flash of uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure how to respond to praise from someone so far above his station. When someone needs help, you help them, he said simply. Doesn't matter who they are or what they do for a living. The statement was delivered without pretension or self-consciousness, but it hit Vivian like a revelation. When was the last time she'd helped someone without calculating what she might gain from it? When had she last done something purely because it was the right thing to do? "Can I ask you something?" she said, surprising herself with the question. "Why do you work 3 jobs?" Ben's hands stilled on his tools. It was a personal question, one that highlighted the economic gulf between them, but something in Vivian's tone suggested genuine curiosity rather than prying. "I have a son," he said quietly. "Danny. He's 16, and he's got this incredible talent for art. Goes to a special school downtown, costs more than I make at any one job, but it's worth it to see him create the things he creates. Tell me about him." The request seemed to unlock something in Ben. His face brightened as he talked about Danny's latest project, a series of paintings inspired by the city's architecture. He spoke with the pride of a father who saw his child's potential and was willing to sacrifice anything to nurture it. "Sounds like an amazing kid," Vivian said when he finished. "And it sounds like he's lucky to have a father who believes in him." "He's the best thing I ever did," Ben replied without hesitation. The simple honesty of the statement made Vivian's chest tighten unexpectedly. She'd never had children, had never prioritized family over career advancement. Listening to Ben talk about his son made her wonder what she might have missed in her relentless pursuit of success. "I should let you get back to work," she said, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his world. "Actually," Ben said, hesitating for a moment, "would you like to see how this all works? The building, I mean. Most people never see what goes on behind the scenes." The offer surprised them both. Ben wasn't sure why he'd made it, and Vivian wasn't sure why she immediately wanted to accept. But for the next hour, Ben led her through the building's mechanical systems, explaining how everything from elevators to air conditioning worked, his expertise evident in every explanation. Vivian found herself genuinely fascinated. She'd spent years making decisions about building operations and maintenance budgets without really understanding what those decisions meant at ground level. Watching Ben work, seeing the complexity of systems she'd taken for granted, gave her a new appreciation for the invisible army of people who made corporate life possible. "This is incredible," she said as Ben showed her the main electrical distribution panel. "I had no idea how complex it all was." "Most people don't," Ben replied. "They flip a switch and expect the lights to work, push a button and expect the elevator to come. They don't think about who makes that happen." There was no bitterness in his voice, just matter-of-fact acceptance of a reality where some people's work was visible and valued, while others labored in the shadows. As they returned to the main floor, Vivian felt changed by the encounter. She'd seen a side of her own building, and a kind of person that she'd never really noticed before. Ben Carter wasn't just a maintenance worker. He was a skilled professional, a devoted father, and a genuinely good man whose worth had nothing to do with his job title or salary. "Thank you," she said as they reached the lobby, "for the tour, and for—" she gestured vaguely, unable to articulate exactly what she was thanking him for. "Any time," Ben replied, and she could tell he meant it. As Vivian rode the elevator back to her office, she stared at her reflection in the polished doors and realized something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of the world. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The college application sat on Ben's kitchen table like an accusation, its glossy cover featuring smiling students in an environment that might as well have been on another planet. The Illinois Institute of Arts brochure promised world-class instruction, state-of-the-art facilities, and connections to the professional art world that could launch a young artist's career. It also promised tuition costs that made Ben's head spin. Danny sat across from him, nervously fidgeting with his pencil, the same nervous habit he'd had since childhood. The application had been hidden under his mattress for 2 weeks before Ben found it during his regular room cleaning a ritual he'd maintained since the divorce to ensure their small apartment stayed livable despite their chaotic schedules. "You could have told me," Ben said gently, studying the requirements and deadlines that Danny had carefully highlighted. "I didn't want to get your hopes up," Danny replied, his voice barely above a whisper, "or stress you out more than you already are." The consideration in his son's words broke Ben's heart. At 16, Danny was already thinking like an adult, already weighing his dreams against his father's limitations. It was a burden no teenager should have to carry. "Don't you ever worry about stressing me out," Ben said firmly. "You're my son, and your dreams are my dreams. We'll figure out a way." But privately, Ben was doing the math, and the numbers were brutal. Even with financial aid which Danny might qualify for based on their income, the remaining costs would be more than Ben made in a year. He'd need to find a 4th job, maybe sell everything they owned, and even then it might not be enough. That night, after Danny had gone to bed, Ben sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by financial documents, loan applications, and scholarship forms. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the papers, making the numbers look even more daunting. He'd filled out similar forms when Danny started at the arts high school, scraping together every possible source of funding, and even then, he'd had to take on the night shift at Meridian Tower just to make ends meet. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his nights maintaining a building where people made more money in a month than he made in a year. Yet here he was, calculating whether he could afford to give his son a chance at a better life. Meanwhile, 50 floors above the city, Vivian Locke was experiencing her own moment of reckoning. For 3 days since her encounter with Ben in the basement, she'd found herself distracted during meetings, her attention wandering from quarterly projections to questions about the people who made those projections possible. She'd started noticing things she'd never paid attention to before: the cleaning crew who worked while she stayed late, the security guards who greeted her each morning, the maintenance staff who kept her world functioning smoothly. They weren't invisible anymore. They were people with stories, families, dreams that existed beyond their job descriptions. The realization had sparked an idea that was equal parts professional strategy and personal mission. Vivian had built her career on identifying inefficiencies and implementing solutions, and now she was seeing the biggest inefficiency of a company that failed to invest in its most valuable resource, its people. She'd spent the weekend researching employee wellness programs, studying companies that had revolutionized their cultures by treating workers as partners rather than replacements. The data was compelling. Companies with comprehensive employee support showed lower turnover, higher productivity, and better financial performance. It wasn't just the right thing to do, it was good business. Monday morning found Vivian in the conference room with her senior leadership team, presenting an idea that felt both revolutionary and obvious. "Employee wellness and advancement," she began, clicking to the first slide of her presentation. "Not just healthcare and vacation days, but comprehensive support for our entire workforce. Career development, education assistance, family support programs." Her CFO, David Richardson, looked skeptical from the moment she started. He was a numbers man, hired to cut costs and maximize efficiency, and Vivian's proposal clearly made him uncomfortable. "What kind of investment are we talking about?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already disapproved of the answer. "Initial implementation would cost approximately $2.7 million annually," Vivian replied, watching the room's energy shift. "But projections show a return on investment within 18 months through reduced turnover and increased productivity." $2.7 million, Richardson repeated, as if the number were personally offensive to him. "Ms. Locke, with respect, we're trying to improve our bottom line, not add new expenses. The board is already questioning our spending priorities." Jennifer Martinez, the head of human resources, leaned forward with interest. "What specific programs are you proposing?" Vivian clicked to the next slide, her confidence growing as she outlined her vision. tuition assistance for employees and their families, on-site childcare, mental health support, and most importantly, a pathway for advancement that recognizes talent and dedication regardless of current position. "You're talking about promoting janitors to management," Richardson said dismissively. "That's not how business works." The comment hit Vivian harder than he could have known. She thought about Ben Carter's expertise, his natural leadership qualities, his genuine care for the people around him. The idea that someone's worth was determined by their job title suddenly seemed not just wrong, but actively destructive. "I'm talking about recognizing talent, wherever we find it," she replied, her voice carrying an edge that made the room pay attention. "Some of our most valuable employees are working in roles that don't begin to utilize their potential." She spent the next hour walking them through case studies, financial projections, and implementation timelines. The response was mixed. Jennifer was enthusiastic, the operations team seemed intrigued, but Richardson remained openly hostile to the entire concept. "This sounds like expensive charity," he concluded. "Our shareholders expect profit growth, not social programs." "Our shareholders expect sustainable success," Vivian countered. "And that comes from treating our people as investments, not expenses." The meeting ended without resolution, but Vivian knew she'd planted seeds that would grow. More importantly, she'd discovered something about herself, a sense of purpose that went beyond quarterly earnings and stock prices. That evening, she found herself taking the elevator to the basement levels again, hoping to continue her conversation with Ben. She found him in a different mechanical room, this time training a new maintenance worker, a young man, who looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the building's systems. "See, Miguel, the key is understanding the relationships," Ben was explaining patiently. "The heating system talks to the electrical system, which talks to the elevator controls. When something goes wrong, you have to think about how it affects everything else." Vivian watched from the doorway as Ben demonstrated a diagnostic procedure, his teaching style clear and encouraging. Miguel asked questions that revealed his inexperience, but Ben answered each one without impatience, clearly invested in his student's success. "Mr. Carter has been here longer than anyone," Miguel told her when Ben introduced them. "He knows this building better than the people who designed it." "I'm sure he does," Vivian replied, watching Ben's modest smile at the compliment. After Miguel left for his break, Vivian found herself alone with Ben again, and this time she had a purpose beyond gratitude. "Can I ask you about your son again?" she said. "You mentioned he's looking at colleges." Ben's expression tightened slightly. "He's got big dreams. Sometimes I wonder if I'm holding him back." "What do you mean?" "Danny's talented enough for the best art schools in the country, but—" Ben gestured around the mechanical room. "This is what I can provide. I work 3 jobs, and it's still not enough for the kind of opportunities he deserves." Vivian felt something click into place, a connection between Ben's personal struggle and her professional mission. Here was a perfect example of wasted potential, not just Ben's underutilized skills, but his son's dreams limited by economic circumstances. "What if there were other options?" she asked carefully. "What if there were ways to advance that didn't depend on having the right connections or the right background?" Ben looked at her curiously. "I'm not sure I follow." "I'm working on some ideas about employee development. Nothing concrete yet, but—" She paused, realizing she was sharing more than she'd intended. "Sometimes the best solutions come from understanding real problems. Your situation, it's not unique. There are a lot of talented people in this building whose potential isn't being recognized." Ben studied her face, clearly trying to understand where this conversation was heading. "You're talking about changing how things work." "I'm talking about changing how we think about people's worth," Vivian replied. "About recognizing that talent and character matter more than job titles." For a moment, they stood in the mechanical room's harsh lighting, 2 people from different worlds, finding common ground in an unexpected place. Neither knew it yet, but this conversation would be the beginning of something that would transform not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. The maintenance logs told a story that Vivian had never bothered to read before. Sitting in her office at 7 a.m., she spread 5 years of building reports across her mahogany desk, each one meticulously handwritten in Ben Carter's careful script. What she discovered made her both impressed and ashamed. Ben had been documenting problems for years: elevator irregularities, electrical inconsistencies, HVAC inefficiencies, with the thoroughness of an engineer and the persistence of someone who genuinely cared about safety. His reports included detailed recommendations, cost estimates for preventive maintenance, and timelines for addressing issues before they became emergencies. Most disturbing of all, Vivian could see where previous building management had systematically ignored his recommendations, choosing cheaper band-aid solutions over proper repairs. The elevator incident that had brought them together wasn't an accident. It was the predictable result of deferred maintenance that Ben had been warning about for 18 months. "Penny wise and pound foolish," she murmured, echoing something her grandmother used to say. The building's previous management had saved money in the short term while creating expensive problems down the road. More importantly, they'd dismissed the expertise of someone who understood their systems better than anyone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Danny's art teacher, Mrs. Chen. "Mr. Carter, could we schedule a meeting about Danny's portfolio development? There are some opportunities we should discuss." Vivian stared at the message, realizing it had been sent to her by mistake. Mrs. Chen had probably confused contact numbers. She should forward it to Ben immediately, but something made her pause. Instead, she found herself researching Mrs. Chen and the art school Danny attended. The Oakland Arts Academy was a magnet school that drew talented students from across Chicago, but it was just the beginning of what a young artist needed. The real opportunities: college preparation, professional mentorship, portfolio development, required additional programs that cost money most families couldn't afford. Vivian had always prided herself on her research skills, and now she turned them toward understanding Ben's world. What she discovered was a dedicated father who had given up everything to support his son's dreams, working multiple jobs just to keep Danny in a school where his talent could flourish. The irony was painful. Ben's expertise and work ethic would be valuable in any corporate setting, but without a college degree or connections, he was trapped in positions that barely paid enough to survive. Meanwhile, his son was incredibly talented, but faced the same economic barriers that kept gifted young people from reaching their potential. That afternoon, Vivian made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of sending her assistant, she personally called Mrs. Chen to arrange a meeting about scholarship opportunities for promising students. She didn't mention Danny by name, but she had a feeling their conversation would be enlightening. "Ms. Locke, how wonderful to hear from someone in the corporate community," Chen said when they met at the school that evening. "We have so many talented students whose families struggle to afford the additional training they need for college applications." Mrs. Chen led Vivian through the school's art studios, showing her student work that was genuinely impressive. The passion and skill on display made Vivian think about her own teenage years, when financial constraints had limited her options and forced her to choose practical career paths over personal interests. "Tell me about Danny Carter," Vivian said, as they stopped before a series of architectural paintings that captured Chicago's skyline with remarkable sophistication. "Danny is extraordinary," Mrs. Chen replied, her face lighting up with teacher's pride. "His technical skill is impressive for someone his age, but more than that, he has vision. He sees beauty in unexpected placey industrial scenes, working-class neighborhoods, the parts of the city most artists ignore." Vivian studied the paintings more closely, recognizing buildings she knew from the corporate district, but rendered with an emotional depth that transformed mere structures into statements about human experience. This wasn't just talent, this was artistic maturity that spoke of deep observation and empathy. "His father is making tremendous sacrifices," Mrs. Chen continued. "Ben works multiple jobs to keep Danny here, but the advanced portfolio development programs he needs for college applications, they're beyond what most families can afford. What kind of programs? Summer intensives, private mentoring, exhibition opportunities. The total cost for proper college preparation is usually around $15,000. For a family like the Carters, it might as well be 15 million. Vivian felt something crystallize in her mind, not just sympathy, but a sense of injustice that went beyond one family's struggle. How many talented young people were held back by economic circumstances? How many potential leaders, artists, innovators were lost because society failed to invest in their development? The next morning brought a confrontation Vivian had been expecting. David Richardson appeared in her office doorway, his expression grim with the satisfaction of someone who believed he was about to deliver a decisive blow. "I've been reviewing your employee wellness proposal," he began without preamble, "and I've discovered some concerning patterns in your recent behavior." Vivian gestured for him to sit, though his aggressive posture suggested he preferred to stand. Such as multiple trips to the basement levels, extended conversations with maintenance staff, unusual interest in building operations that fall well outside your executive responsibilities. Richardson's tone made it clear he considered these activities somehow improper. "I'm trying to understand all aspects of our operations," Vivian replied calmly. "That seems like responsible leadership to me." "The board is questioning your judgment," Richardson continued. "There are concerns that you're becoming too emotionally involved with staff members, that your decision-making is being compromised by personal feelings rather than business logic." The accusation hit exactly where Richardson intended at Vivian's carefully maintained professional image. In her corporate world, emotion was weakness, and personal connection was a liability that compromised objective judgment. But instead of the defensive response Richardson clearly expected, Vivian felt a surge of clarity. She thought about Ben's patient competence, his dedication to his son, his genuine care for the people around him. She thought about Danny's artistic vision and Mrs. Chen's frustrated dedication to students who deserved better opportunities. "You're right," she said quietly. "I am emotionally involved. I'm emotionally involved in running a company that treats people with dignity and recognizes talent wherever we find it. If that compromises my judgment in your opinion, so be it." Richardson's confident expression faltered slightly. "Vivian, the board expects results," she interrupted, "and I'm going to give them results they never imagined possible, but I'm going to do it by investing in people, not by treating them as disposable resources." After Richardson left, clearly unsettled by her response, Vivian sat alone in her office, staring out at the city skyline. She was at a crossroads. She realized she could retreat to the safe, conventional approach that had brought her this far, or she could risk everything on the belief that there was a better way to do business. Her decision surprised no one more than herself. She picked up her phone and called Jennifer Martinez in Human Resources. "Jennifer, I want you to set up meetings with our entire night shift staff over the next 2 weeks. Individual conversations, not group sessions. I want to understand what we're not seeing about our own operations." "All of them?" Jennifer asked, clearly surprised. "Every single person who works in this building after 6 p.m., starting with Ben Carter." That evening, Vivian found herself back in the basement levels, but this time with a different purpose. She wasn't just visiting, she was learning, asking questions, listening to the stories of people whose work had been invisible to her for too long. Ben was training Miguel again, this time on electrical systems, and Vivian watched the easy mentorship between them. Here was leadership in its purest form, not about titles or corner offices, but about sharing knowledge and lifting others up. "Mr. Carter," she said when the training session ended, "I have a proposition for you, and I think it's going to change both our lives." Jennifer Martinez had been watching Vivian Locke's transformation with the knowing eyes of someone who understood what it meant to climb from the bottom. As Vivian's executive assistant, Jennifer had a front-row seat to the CEO's evolution, from corporate strategist to someone genuinely concerned about the people who made the company function. "Ms. Locke," Jennifer said, appearing in the doorway of Vivian's office with her usual professional demeanor. "Do you have a few minutes? There's something I think you should know." Vivian looked up from the employee wellness proposal she'd been refining, noting something different in Jennifer's tone, more personal, less formal than their usual interactions. "Of course, come in." Jennifer closed the door behind her and took a seat across from Vivian's desk, her posture suggesting this was more than a routine business conversation. "I've been with this company for 8 years," Jennifer began, "and I've seen a lot of executives come and go. Most of them talk about caring about employees, but you're the first one I've seen actually trying to understand what that means." Vivian set down her pen, giving Jennifer her full attention. "Thank you, though I'm sensing there's more you want to tell me." "There is." Jennifer paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I grew up in Pilsen, on the south side. My mother cleaned office buildings for 20 years, worked nights just like Ben Carter does now. I know what it looks like when someone has genuine character versus when they're just playing a role." The revelation shifted something in the room's dynamic. Jennifer had never shared personal details about her background, maintaining the professional distance that executive assistants were trained to preserve. "Ben Carter is the real deal," Jennifer continued. "I've watched him help people in this building for years, covering shifts when someone's kid was sick, training new employees on his own time, even lending money to co-workers who couldn't make rent. That kind of leadership can't be taught in business school." Vivian felt a warm validation of her own growing respect for Ben, but she sensed Jennifer wasn't finished. "The board is going to fight you on this," Jennifer warned. "David Richardson has been building a case against your leadership style, questioning your judgment. He's got Harold Brennan's ear, and Brennan still has influence, even though he's supposedly retired." The mention of Harold Brennan, her predecessor as CEO, sent a chill through Vivian. Brennan had been forced out after a series of ethical scandals, but his network of allies within the company remained powerful. If he was actively working against her initiatives, that explained the board's growing resistance. "What aren't you telling me?" Vivian asked. Jennifer's expression darkened. "There's talk of calling a special board meeting to review your performance. Brennan is suggesting you've lost focus, that you're more interested in social programs than business results." The timing couldn't be worse. Vivian's employee wellness proposal was scheduled for presentation to the board next week, and now she learned that some board members were already predisposed to see it as evidence of poor judgment rather than innovative leadership. Meanwhile, across the city in his small apartment, Ben Carter was facing his own crisis of confidence. The college application deadline was approaching, and despite his best efforts, the financial reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Danny sat at their kitchen table, quietly working on his portfolio, but Ben could see the weight of unspoken worry in his son's shoulders. The advanced summer program that Mrs. Chen had recommended, the one that could make the difference between community college and a prestigious art school, required a deposit they simply couldn't afford. Ben had filled out loan applications, investigated every scholarship opportunity, even considered taking a fourth job, but the numbers still didn't add up. He was trapped in the cruel mathematics of working poverty-making, too much to qualify for need-based aid, but nowhere near enough to actually afford his son's dreams. The resignation letter had been surprisingly easy to write. Rodriguez Construction was expanding, and they'd offered Ben a foreman position that paid significantly more than his current 3 jobs combined. It would mean giving up the night shift at Meridian Tower, leaving behind the colleagues who'd become like family, but it might finally provide the financial stability that Danny deserved. "Dad?" Danny's voice broke through Ben's thoughts. "Are you okay?" Ben looked up to find his son studying him with concern that was far too mature for 16 years old. Danny had always been perceptive, attuned to his father's moods in the way children of single parents learn to be. "Just thinking about some changes at work," Ben replied, not wanting to burden Danny with adult worries. Good changes or bad changes? The question was so direct, so hopeful, that Ben felt his heart break a little. Danny was asking if their financial struggles might finally be over, if the sacrifices might finally pay off. "We'll see," Ben said gently. But no matter what happens, you keep working on that portfolio. Your talent deserves every opportunity we can give it." Danny nodded, but Ben could see the boy didn't quite believe it. At 16, Danny was old enough to understand that talent without resources often remained just potential, and potential didn't pay for college. That evening, Ben arrived at Meridian Tower for what he'd decided would be one of his last shifts. He'd submit his resignation to building management tomorrow, give 2 weeks' notice, and try to transition smoothly to a job that could actually support his family's needs. He was checking the HVAC systems on the 20th floor when his radio crackled to life. "Ben, you've got a visitor down here," Carlos reported. "Says she needs to speak with you about something important." Ben found Vivian waiting in the lobby, but something was different about her tonight. She seemed nervous, almost excited, clutching a folder that she held like it contained something precious. "I've been working on something," she said without preamble. "A program that could change everything, not just for you, but for everyone in this building who's been overlooked and undervalued." Ben felt a moment of confusion. "Ms. Locke, I appreciate whatever you're thinking, but—" "Director of Employee Wellness and Development," Vivian interrupted, opening her folder to reveal a detailed job description. "A new position I'm creating. Someone to design and implement programs that support our entire workforce career development, education assistance, family support services." Ben stared at the documents, trying to process what he was seeing. The salary listed was more than double what he made from all 3 of his current jobs combined. The benefits package included health insurance, retirement contributions, and most incredibly education assistance that would cover college tuition for employees' children. "This is—" Ben struggled to find words. "I don't understand. Why are you showing me this?" "Because I want you to take the job," Vivian said simply. "You already do this work, informally training new employees, supporting your co-workers, understanding what people really need to succeed. I want to make it official, and I want to pay you what you're actually worth." Ben's hands trembled slightly as he held the job description. It was everything he'd never dared to dream of: financial security, meaningful work, the ability to help others while supporting his own family. "I don't have the qualifications," he said quietly. "No college degree, no management experience." "You have something better," Vivian replied. "You have the respect and trust of every person in this building. You have the wisdom that comes from actually doing the work, understanding the problems from the inside out. Most importantly, you have the character to use power responsibly." For a long moment, they stood in the lobby's polished marble space, the sound of the city muted by thick glass walls. Ben could see his reflection in the windows, a maintenance worker in a wrinkled uniform, holding a folder that promised to transform his life. "There's one thing you should know," Vivian continued. "Taking this position might cost me my job. The board doesn't approve of my approach, and there are people actively working to have me removed. If you accept this offer, we'll both be taking a huge risk." Ben looked at her, this powerful woman who was willing to sacrifice her own career to give him a chance at something better. The gesture was so fundamentally generous, so completely unexpected, that it redefined his understanding of what leadership could look like. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because it's right," Vivian replied. "Because talent and character shouldn't be wasted just because someone was born into the wrong economic circumstances. Because I've spent my whole career climbing ladders, and I've finally realized the only thing that matters is whether you pull others up with you." Ben thought about Danny, about the college applications and the dreams that had seemed impossible just hours ago. He thought about Maria and Carlos and Miguel, about all the hard-working people who deserved better opportunities than they'd been given. And he thought about the resignation letter in his locker, the safe choice that would solve his immediate problems but change nothing for anyone else. "When do we start?" he asked. Vivian's smile was radiant. "Tomorrow morning. But first, we need to survive the board meeting where I'm going to propose this program. And Ben, that's not going to be easy for either of us." The Meridian Technology Solutions boardroom occupied the entire 49th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Lake Michigan and the Chicago skyline. Under normal circumstances, the room embodied corporate power and success-polished marble floors, handcrafted conference table, leather chairs that cost more than most people made in a month. Today, it felt like a courtroom. Vivian arrived early, spreading her presentation materials across the imposing table with hands that were steadier than she felt. 6 months ago, this room had represented the pinnacle of her professional aspirations. Now it felt like a battlefield where the company's soul would be decided. She'd spent the entire night refining her proposal, building a comprehensive case that combined financial projections with human stories, hard data with moral imperatives. The employee wellness program wasn't just the right thing to do, it was smart business that would revolutionize how the company operated. But she knew the real fight wouldn't be about numbers. It would be about fundamentally different visions of what a company could be. Jennifer arrived precisely at 7:30 a.m., carrying coffee and the kind of quiet support that had become invaluable over the past weeks. "The board members are arriving," she reported. "Harold Brennan is here, even though he's supposedly retired." Vivian felt her stomach tighten. Brennan's presence meant this wasn't just a routine board meeting, it was an orchestrated challenge to her leadership. The former CEO had been forced out amid ethical scandals, but his network of corporate allies remained powerful enough to influence company direction. "Any word from Ben?" Vivian asked. "He's in the building. Said he'll be ready when you need him." The board members filed in over the next 10 minutes, their expressions ranging from politely neutral to openly skeptical. David Richardson entered with Harold Brennan, both men carrying the confidence of people who believed they already knew the meeting's outcome. Brennan hadn't changed much in the 6 months since his departure, still the silver-haired embodiment of old-school corporate leadership, still carrying himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never questioned his own authority. His presence in the room felt like a challenge to everything Vivian was trying to accomplish. "Harold," Vivian acknowledged him with professional courtesy, "I wasn't expecting to see you today. When I heard about your interesting new initiatives, I felt compelled to observe." Brennan replied smoothly, "After all, I spent 15 years building this company's reputation. I have a vested interest in seeing it maintained." The implication was clear: Vivian's leadership was threatening everything he'd built, and he was here to protect his legacy. Board Chair Margaret Foster called the meeting to order, her expression diplomatically neutral, but her tone suggesting she wanted to get through this unpleasant business as efficiently as possible. "Vivian, I understand you have a comprehensive presentation about employee programs. Given the concerns that have been raised about budget priorities and strategic focus, we're eager to hear your rationale." Vivian stood, clicking to her first slide, with the confidence of someone who'd built her career on making compelling presentations. But this felt different, more personal, more important than any pitch she'd ever made. "Employee Wellness and Advancement Initiative," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the boardroom. "A comprehensive program designed to unlock the potential that already exists within our workforce." She walked them through the financial projections: first, reduced turnover, saving millions annually; increased productivity, driving revenue growth; competitive advantages in recruiting and retention. The numbers were compelling, but she could see Richardson preparing his counter-arguments. "The initial investment is significant," she acknowledged, "but the return on investment becomes clear within 18 months. More importantly, this positions us as an industry leader in corporate responsibility and sustainable business practices." $2.7 million annually, Richardson interjected, his tone making the amount sound personally offensive. "At a time when we're supposed to be cutting costs and improving margins. $2.7 million that will generate over $4 million in savings and new revenue within 2 years. Vivian countered. "This isn't an expense, it's an investment in our most valuable asset." She clicked to the next slide, showing retention statistics from companies with similar programs. "Organizations that invest in comprehensive employee development see turnover reduction of 30 to 40%. In our industry, Replacing a skilled employee costs approximately 1.5 times their annual salary. Board member Patricia Wells raised her hand. These programs you're proposing, tuition assistance, career advancement, family support, who exactly would be eligible? Every employee, Vivian replied without hesitation. From executive assistants to maintenance staff, talent exists at every level of our organization, and we're wasting it by failing to recognize and develop it. She saw several board members exchange glances. The idea of investing equally in all employees, regardless of their current position, clearly made them uncomfortable. Which brings me to the leadership component of this initiative, Vivian continued, clicking to a slide that showed organizational charts. I'm proposing to create a director of employee wellness position, someone who would design and implement these programs based on real understanding of our workforce needs. And who did you have in mind for this position? Foster asked. Ben Carter, currently working in building maintenance. He has demonstrated exceptional leadership abilities, deep understanding of employee concerns, and the respect of workers throughout the organization. The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian could see shock, confusion, and outright disapproval on several faces around the table. Harold Brennan leaned forward, his expression suggesting he'd been waiting for this moment. Vivian, are you seriously proposing to promote a janitor to an executive position? The dismissive term janitor hung in the air like an insult. Vivian felt her anger rise, but she forced herself to remain calm and professional. I'm proposing to promote a skilled maintenance professional who has consistently demonstrated leadership, problem-solving abilities, and genuine care for the people around him. Someone who understands our operations from the ground up and has earned the trust of our entire workforce. This is exactly what we were concerned about, Richardson said, his tone suggesting vindication. Emotional decision-making that prioritizes personal feelings over business logic. There's nothing emotional about recognizing talent, Vivian replied firmly. Ben Carter has been training new employees, mediating workplace disputes, and identifying operational inefficiencies for years. He's already doing leadership work. I'm simply proposing to acknowledge and compensate it appropriately. She spent the next 20 minutes walking them through specific examples of Ben's contributions, from his detailed maintenance reports that could have prevented costly failures to his informal mentoring of younger employees. With each example, she could see the board's discomfort growing. Margaret Foster finally raised her hand for silence. Vivian, even if we accept that Mr. Carter has valuable skills, surely you can see how promoting someone without appropriate educational credentials would be. Would be what? Vivian interrupted, her careful composure finally cracking. Would be recognition that intelligence and leadership come in many forms. That a man who works 3 jobs to support his son's education while maintaining one of the most complex buildings in Chicago might have something valuable to offer. The passion in her voice seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. This wasn't the measured, strategic presentation she'd planned. It was a defense of principles she hadn't even realized she held so strongly. You want to see Mr. Carter's qualifications, Vivian continued, clicking to a new slide. He's prevented 3 potential safety incidents in the past year through proactive maintenance. He's trained 12 new employees, all of whom are still with the company. He's improved building efficiency by 15% through systematic upgrades he recommended and implemented. Harold Brennan stood slowly, his movement commanding attention. Vivian, I think we've heard enough. This proposal represents exactly the kind of misguided thinking that threatens our company's competitive position. Promoting maintenance workers to executive roles, spending millions on social programs. This isn't business leadership, it's ideology. It's evolution, Vivian replied, meeting his gaze directly. It's recognizing that the old ways of doing business, treating people as disposable resources, ignoring talent that doesn't come with the right pedigree, those ways don't work anymore. The confrontation was everything she'd feared, and everything she'd known was necessary. Around the table, board members were choosing sides, their faces reflecting the fundamental divide in corporate philosophy that her proposal had exposed. "I'd like to call Mr. Carter to speak for himself," Vivian announced, surprising even herself with the decision. "If you're going to judge his qualifications, you should at least hear from him directly." The request sent murmurs around the table. Having a maintenance worker address the board was unprecedented, but Vivian was beyond caring about precedent. "This is highly irregular," Foster protested. "So is wasting the potential of good people because they don't fit our narrow definitions of leadership." Vivian replied, "Ben Carter is in the building. Give him 10 minutes to speak, and then make your decision based on the actual person rather than your assumptions about his job title." The vote to allow Ben's testimony passed by a single vote, and as Jennifer left to get him, Vivian realized she'd just bet everything, her career, her reputation, her future, on a maintenance worker's ability to convince a corporate board that character mattered more than credentials. In 15 minutes, Ben Carter would walk into the most intimidating room in the building and make a case for a completely different way of thinking about human potential. Neither of them knew if he was ready for that moment, but they were about to find out. The Meridian Tower had seen many important meetings over the years, but none that would determine whether a company could transform from the inside out, whether two people from different worlds could bridge that gap, and whether genuine leadership could triumph over corporate politics. Everything hinged on what happened next. The elevator ride to the 49th floor felt like the longest journey of Ben Carter's life. He stood beside Jennifer Martinez, his weathered hands smoothing down his best shirt, the same one he'd worn to Danny's art shows and parent-teacher conferences. It wasn't a suit, wasn't corporate attire, but it was clean and pressed, and the best representation of who he was. "Just be yourself," Jennifer advised quietly as they rose through the floors. "That's all she's asking for." Ben nodded, though his stomach churned with nervousness that had nothing to do with the elevator's motion. In 52 years, he'd never imagined himself in a corporate boardroom, never dreamed he'd be asked to defend his worth to people who made more money in a month than he'd made in his entire adult life. The boardroom doors opened to reveal a scene that might have intimidated him into silence 6 months ago. 12 of Chicago's most powerful business leaders sat around a table that could have served as a landing pad for small aircraft, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. At the head of the table, Vivian Locke offered him an encouraging nod, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Carter," Board Chair Margaret Foster said with formal politeness, "please, take a seat." Ben remained standing, feeling more comfortable on his feet, more like himself. "Thank you, ma'am, but I'd prefer to stand if that's all right." Harold Brennan leaned back in his chair with a slight smirk, as if Ben's discomfort confirmed everything he'd expected about bringing working-class people into executive spaces. "Mr. Carter," Foster continued, "Ms. Locke has proposed promoting you to a senior management position. We'd like to hear your perspective on your qualifications for such a role." Ben looked around the room, taking in faces that represented decades of corporate power and privilege. He thought about the resignation letter still sitting in his locker downstairs, about the construction foreman job that would solve his immediate problems, but change nothing for anyone else. "I've worked in this building for 5 years, he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "In that time, I've learned every system, every corner, every person who keeps this place running. I know which elevator motor needs replacement, which HVAC unit runs hot, and which security guard covers extra shifts when his wife needs medical care." David Richardson interrupted with barely concealed impatience. "Mr. Carter, building maintenance is certainly valuable, but we're discussing executive leadership. Management requires strategic thinking, financial analysis, decision-making at a completely different level." "You're right," Ben replied, surprising Richardson with his agreement. "Management does require those things, but it also requires understanding the people you're managing, knowing what motivates them, what challenges they face, what support they need to do their best work." He gestured toward the windows overlooking the city. "Every night, I work alongside people who are supporting families, pursuing education, dealing with problems that don't disappear when they clock in. Maria Santos is raising 3 kids as a single mother while taking online business classes. Miguel Rodriguez is supporting his elderly parents while learning skills that could advance his career. Carlos Mendoza has 30 years of security experience, but no formal training in conflict resolution. "And your point is?" Brennan asked dismissively. "My point is that these people have incredible potential that's being wasted because nobody takes the time to see it," Ben replied, his voice gaining strength. "Maria has natural organizational skills that could benefit any department. Miguel learns faster than anyone I've ever trained. Carlos can diffuse tense situations better than most trained negotiators." He paused, looking directly at each board member. "You're sitting here debating whether to invest in programs that could unlock that potential, and some of you think it's too expensive. I'm telling you, it's too expensive not to do it." Patricia Wells leaned forward with interest. "Can you give us a specific example?" Ben nodded. "Last month, we had a water main break in the basement that could have flooded the server rooms and shut down the entire building. The emergency response plan called for evacuating the building and waiting for city crews. Instead, Carlos identified the specific valve location from memory. Miguel helped me access the shutoff through a maintenance tunnel most people don't even know exists, and Maria coordinated with building tenants to minimize disruption. He could see he had their attention now. We had the problem solved in 40 minutes instead of 4 hours. Saved the company probably $250,000 in lost productivity, prevented equipment damage, kept our tenants happy. But none of that shows up in any performance review because it was just maintenance workers doing their jobs." Margaret Foster made a note on her pad. "That's certainly impressive problem solving." "It happens every day," Ben continued. "But here's what doesn't happen. These people never get recognition for their initiative, never get opportunities for advancement, never get the training that could make them even more valuable. So eventually, they stop going above and beyond, or they leave for companies that appreciate what they bring." Harold Brennan stood abruptly, his face flushed with frustration. "This is exactly what I warned you about," he said, addressing the board rather than Ben. "Promoting janitors to management positions based on feel, good stories rather than actual qualifications." The word janitors hit the room like a slap, and Ben felt his composure waver for the first time. Around the table, he could see board members' reactions, some uncomfortable with Brennan's bluntness, others nodding in agreement. "Mr. Brennan," Ben said quietly, his voice carrying a dignity that seemed to fill the room, "I've never been ashamed of honest work. I've cleaned offices, fixed machines, and maintained buildings because that work matters. The people in those jobs matter. And if you can't see the value in that, then maybe the problem isn't with my qualifications." The silence that followed was profound. Ben had just challenged one of Chicago's most powerful business leaders in front of the Meridian board, and everyone in the room understood the significance of that moment. Vivian felt her heart racing as she watched Ben stand his ground against Brennan's dismissiveness. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, not subservience or attempts to fit corporate expectations, but authentic leadership that commanded respect through character rather than credentials. But she also knew they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Harold Brennan's face was dark with anger, and David Richardson was already preparing what looked like a devastating response. The next few minutes would determine not just Ben's future, but whether the Meridian Technology Solutions Board was ready to embrace a completely different definition of leadership. The tension in the boardroom was electric as Harold Brennan faced Ben Carter across the polished conference table. For a moment, the former CEO seemed genuinely speechless, unaccustomed to being challenged by someone he considered beneath his notice. "Mr. Carter," Brennan finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "I think you've misunderstood your position here. This isn't about the value of maintenance work, it's about the qualifications necessary for executive leadership in a Fortune 500 company." Ben felt the weight of every board member's attention, but instead of intimidation, he found himself thinking about Danny's courage when presenting his art to judges who might not understand his vision. Sometimes you had to stand up for what mattered, regardless of the odds. You're right about one thing, Mr. Brennan, Ben replied steadily. I don't have an MBA or a corner office or connections to the right country clubs. What I do have is 5 years of watching this company waste the potential of good people because you've never bothered to look beyond job titles. The boardroom door opened unexpectedly, and Margaret Foster looked up with annoyance. Jennifer, we asked not to be... But it wasn't Jennifer who entered. Danny Carter stood in the doorway, his 16-year-old frame looking small in the imposing space. Clutching a folder and wearing the same determined expression, Ben recognized from every important moment in his son's life. I'm sorry to interrupt, Danny said, his voice clear despite his obvious nervousness. But Mrs. Chen said this might be important. Behind Danny came Mrs. Chen herself, followed by Carlos Mendoza, Maria Santos, and Miguel Rodriguez. Within moments, the boardroom was filled with people who had never set foot in this corporate sanctuary. Night shift workers, teachers, the invisible army that kept both the building and the broader community functioning. Harold Brennan's face went from red to purple. This is completely inappropriate. Security should have. I told them to come up, Carlos interrupted with quiet dignity. These people have something to say about Ben Carter's qualifications, and I figured you might want to hear it. Margaret Foster looked to Vivian for explanation, but Vivian was as surprised as anyone. She hadn't orchestrated this moment, but she recognized its power immediately. Mrs. Chen, Danny said, handing his teacher the folder he'd been carrying. Would you show them the letter? Mrs. Chen opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. This is a thank you letter my students wrote to Mr. Carter. They wanted to express what his example has meant to them. She began reading in her clear teacher's voice. Dear Mr. Carter, you probably don't know us, but we know you. Our teacher, Mrs. Chen, told us about how hard you work to support Danny's education, and it inspired us to think about our own fathers and mothers who sacrifice for our dreams. Around the conference table, board members shifted uncomfortably as Mrs. Chen continued. Miguel's father works 2 jobs just like you do. Maria's mother cleans offices at night, so Maria can go to college during the day. We realize that our parents are heroes, just like you are, even though nobody ever calls them that. Ben felt his throat tighten as he listened to words from children who understood sacrifice in ways these board members never would. But here's what really matters, Mrs. Chen read on. You didn't just work hard for Danny, you helped other people too. Carlos told us how you trained him for his security certification. Maria's mom said you helped her son get a job interview. When the heating broke at school, you came on your day off and fixed it for free. Harold Brennan tried to interrupt, but Maria Santos stepped forward, her cleaning uniform, a stark contrast to the boardroom's luxury. Mr. Brennan, she said with quiet dignity, you don't know me, but I've cleaned your old office for 3 years. I've seen how you treat people, how you talk about workers when you think nobody's listening. Ben Carter treats everyone with respect, no matter what job they do. Miguel nodded agreement. He taught me electrical systems on his own time, never asked for anything in return, said knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. Carlos addressed the board directly. I've worked security in corporate buildings for 30 years. I've seen executives come and go, watched companies rise and fall. Ben Carter has the kind of character you can't teach in business school and can't buy with a salary. If you're too blind to see that, the problem isn't with him. Danny stepped forward, his young voice carrying surprising strength. You're debating whether my father is qualified to help people, but he's been helping people his whole life. He helped me believe in my art when I thought we couldn't afford dreams. He helped Mrs. Chen's students see that hard work has dignity. He helped everyone in this room remember that success isn't just about money, it's about lifting others up. The folder in Danny's hands contained drawing sketches of Ben at work, of the building's community, of people finding dignity in honest labor. As he spread them across the conference table, the room fell silent. This is who my father is, Danny said simply. This is what leadership looks like when it comes from the heart instead of a handbook. Margaret Foster stared at the drawings, her corporate composure cracking as she saw Ben Carter through his son's eyes, not a maintenance worker seeking promotion, but a leader who'd already been leading, a teacher who'd already been teaching, a man who'd been building community in a world that too often tore it down. Harold Brennan made one last attempt to regain control. This is all very touching, but sentiment doesn't qualify someone for executive responsibility. Carlos looked at him with the patience of someone who dealt with difficult people for decades. Mr. Brennan, with all due respect, Ben Carter has been carrying executive responsibility for years. We just never bothered to call it that. The room fell silent as the weight of that truth settled over everyone present. Ben Carter wasn't asking for a chance to become a leader, he'd been leading all along. The only question was whether the Meridian Technology Solutions Board was wise enough to recognize it. 6 months later, Ben Carter stood in his new office on the 20th floor of the Meridian Tower, adjusting the nameplate that still felt surreal every time he saw it. Benjamin Carter, Director of Employee Wellness and Development. His weathered tool belt hung on a hook beside his desk, not as decoration, but as a reminder of where he'd come from and the values that had brought him here. The morning sun streamed through windows that offered a view he'd never imagined having, but Ben's attention was focused on the quarterly report spread across his desk. The numbers told a story that even the board's most skeptical members couldn't argue with. Employee turnover down 38%, productivity up 22%, and workplace satisfaction scores at an all-time high. More importantly, the human stories behind those numbers represented transformed lives throughout the building. Miguel Rodriguez had completed his electrical engineering certification and was now supervising building systems, his natural aptitude finally matched with formal training. Maria Santos was pursuing her business degree with company-sponsored tuition assistance, while her eldest son worked in the mail-roomer job Ben had helped him secure after that first interview preparation session. The employee wellness program had exceeded every projection Vivian had presented to the board. What she hadn't anticipated was how quickly other companies would try to poach both the program's architect and its participants, forcing Meridian to become even more competitive in retaining the talent they'd invested in developing. A knock on his door interrupted Ben's review. "Come in." Danny entered, but this wasn't the uncertain 16-year-old who'd defended his father in the boardroom 6 months ago. At 17, Danny Carter carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd seen his dreams become possible. His acceptance letter to the Art Institute of Chicago was framed on Ben's desk-full scholarship, based on a portfolio that had impressed admissions committees at 6 different schools. "Ready for lunch?" Danny asked, gesturing toward the building's cafeteria where they'd started meeting every Friday when Danny's school schedule allowed. "Almost," Ben replied, saving the report he'd been reviewing. "How did the interview go?" Danny's face lit up. "They offered me the internship, paid position this summer, working with a graphic design firm downtown. Mrs. Chen says it's exactly the kind of experience that'll set me up for success in college." Ben felt the familiar surge of pride that came with watching his son's potential unfold. The financial pressures that had once seemed insurmountable were now manageable, but more importantly, Danny had learned to dream without fear. As they walked toward the elevator, Ben reflected on how much their world had changed. The same elevator shaft where he'd rescued Vivian Locke now felt like a symbol of connection rather than crisis, the place where 2 people from different worlds had discovered they shared the same fundamental values. "Dad," Danny said as they waited for the elevator, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "When I graduate college, I want to come back here, not to work for the company, necessarily, but to help with the program. There are probably other kids whose families are struggling, other parents working multiple jobs just to keep their children's dreams alive." The maturity in Danny's voice reminded Ben that adversity, handled right, could teach lessons that prosperity never could. His son had learned empathy through struggle, had developed character through watching his father's daily example of persistence and dignity. The elevator doors opened to reveal Vivian Locke, though she looked different from the stressed executive Ben had first encountered in the darkness. Success had a different quality, now less frantic, more sustainable, grounded in relationships rather than just results. "Ben, Danny," she greeted them warmly. "How was the interview?" "He got the internship," Ben reported, unable to hide his pride. "Outstanding. I told you that portfolio was impressive." Vivian's genuine pleasure in Danny's success reflected how much she'd changed as well. The employee wellness program had transformed her leadership style, making her more connected to the human impact of business decisions. The board meeting that had almost cost both of them their careers was now cited as a turning point in corporate culture. Harold Brennan had resigned from the board entirely after his confrontational approach was rejected by his fellow members. David Richardson had transferred to another company, replaced by executives who understood that sustainable success required investment in people. Most surprisingly, Meridian Technology Solutions had become a case study in business schools, an example of how companies could revolutionize their operations by recognizing talent, regardless of its packaging. Vivian received speaking invitations from across the country, but she rarely accepted them. Her focus remained on the daily work of building something better where she was. "I have news," Vivian announced as they reached the cafeteria. "The board approved expansion of the program to our satellite offices. We're going to need someone to lead the implementation." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Someone like who?" "Someone like Maria Santos. Her business degree will be finished next month, and she's already proven she can manage complex operations. I'd like to promote her to Regional Coordinator for Employee Development." The suggestion was typical of how the program had evolved, identifying potential wherever it existed, creating pathways for advancement that hadn't existed before. Maria's journey from night shift cleaning to regional management was exactly the kind of transformation Ben had envisioned when he'd first accepted Vivian's offer. As they found seats in the cafeteria, Ben looked around at the bustling lunch crowd, executives eating alongside maintenance workers, managers consulting with custodial staff on operational improvements, interns learning from people whose wisdom came from experience rather than textbooks. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Ben said, cutting into his sandwich. "That night in the elevator when everything started, if the power hadn't gone out, if you hadn't been trapped, we would have found each other eventually." Vivian interrupted with conviction. "Maybe not that night, maybe not in that way, but the problems we solved were real. The potential we unlocked was always there. Sooner or later, someone would have noticed." Danny looked between them, sensing the deeper meaning in their conversation. "You really think so?" "I know so," Ben replied. "Good people recognize other good people, and good work always finds a way to matter. It just sometimes takes the right circumstances to make it visible." The afternoon sun streamed through the cafeteria windows, illuminating faces that represented every level of the corporate hierarchy, but somehow felt like family. Outside, Chicago bustled with the energy of people pursuing their own dreams, fighting their own battles, working their own multiple jobs to support the people they loved. Inside the Meridian Tower, Ben Carter sat with his son and his friend, surrounded by a community they'd helped build, in a company that had learned to measure success not just in profits, but in the potential it helped people achieve. The weathered tool belt hanging in his office remained there, not as a monument to where he'd been, but as a reminder that honest work, genuine care, and quiet leadership could transform the world one person at a time. Sometimes all it took was darkness, desperation, and two strangers talking through a wall. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those conversations in the darkness led to something brighter than either person had dared to imagine.